With the success of Metaphor Refantazio, obviously Atlas wants to capitalize on that. I'm sure this was in the works at least somewhat either before or slightly after the release of Metaphor, but we finally have the first chapter of Metaphor Refantazio's manga adaptation. It is going to be a while before we see the full thing. And since that's released and I've read it, I want to talk about it because things are a little bit different.
Everything that happens from here on in is real.
For one, there are some changes. Big changes to the narrative and its presentation. This will contain spoilers for the first chapter of Metaphor Refantazio and the first few hours of Metaphor overall. At the start of the game, the protagonist, who is named Will in this adaptation, so we're just going to call him Will, is riding in a wagon, which he gets stopped by bandits. In order to defend the passengers, Hulkenberg fights off the bandits, while Will is also tossed off a cliff. In the adaptation, it's a little bit different. Stroll, your first companion, instead winds up replacing Hulkenberg in the wagon. Will is also kind of knocked off the cliff more casually, rather than the bandits trying to steal his book, but that's not really important. Upon arriving in Grand Trad, the first major city, Will meets Maria, and shares the story within his novel with her. Shortly after that, she's kidnapped by someone, Will reunites with Stroll and goes to save her. During this scuffle, Will winds up losing his novel, and upon saving Maria, Will returns to Grand Trad with her and brings her home where he meets Grius. While talking, Stroll winds up returning and shows that he retrieved Will's novel, and the story ends off right before the assassination attempt of Count Luis. This is an incredibly brief summary, and I would recommend that you actually read the chapter if you want to experience it, rather than take this summary as the most detailed and best explanation for what happened in the chapter.
Time marches on, and the age of a new king draws nearer.
If we're being technical, the manga storyline takes place in a alternative universe to the original game story. If we're being realistic, then the changes are likely made to streamline the events of the narrative, to get to a higher point earlier, rather than spending the first 2 to 3 chapters not really doing that much. Since in a manga you want to engage the reader with every chapter, instead of spending an entire chapter talking to Klinger and signing up for the army, they condense the process of introducing you to important characters. Within the first chapter, we're introduced to Stroll, Maria, and Grius, who are all major characters in the narrative in some way, shape, or form. Whereas in the game, it takes about 3 to 5 hours to do all of this. It's not perfect, and it does make me question whether certain events are going to happen, but there's opportunity for all of it to happen still. I can, for the time being, justify the alteration to events within the narrative. It kind of makes sense that Stroll is aboard the wagon in the beginning, as he was also coming to Grand Trad to enlist in the army. His pride as a noble would have been wounded if he didn't take action against bandits, unrightfully stealing things from innocent people. And introducing Maria a bit earlier also makes sense. In the end, we wind up meeting with Grius either way. That's kind of the whole point of our coming to Grand Trad. I sense that there will be some major to minor shakeups to the events happening within the plot for the manga. We still have 2 awakenings to get through, and assuming Grius dies here, as he does in-game, it would kind of ruin the tension of the whole does he know thing for Luis if Luis is present when Will awakens to the power of the archetypes. Additionally, while he is a minor character, Klinger is also a big part of Stroll's awakening, so if we skip Klinger entirely, then they have to rewrite Stroll's awakening, and that is messy, to say the least. Since Hulkenberg was not aboard the wagon, you've yet to be introduced to her in this version of the story, which isn't really a big deal. She really doesn't become important until Grius is dead. I am a little concerned with how the manga is going to handle the existing narrative, but hopefully things slow down a bit. It establishes a lot in the first chapter, and I'm left feeling like the pacing could ease up so it can allow everything to set in.
What we have to offer you is but a taste of the story from its beginning.
I mean, it's chapter 1. If I'm placing final judgments on one chapter, that's insane. In all honesty, I don't see an issue with most of the changes currently. It's a matter of how the changes are handled in the context of the narrative that will determine if this adaptation is good or bad, at least in my eyes. As I was saying before, if they cannot retain that feeling of anxiety I had in the main game's narrative, by making it obvious that Luis knows something is going on, or more is going on, or by allowing the reader to know that Luis knows what's going on, then the adaptation should have just been a one-to-one of the game's narrative. It's not necessarily a bad thing to allow for changes during any form of adaptation. Persona 4's anime has a lot of creative liberties taken that don't ruin the plot or make it more confusing, and allowing creatives to add in small bits and pieces and adapt the social links in a more unique way than making them one-to-one ultimately turned out fine for P4. The difficulty is making it work. Adding events is usually more effective than taking away events. Altering events, on the other hand, can be difficult to accept for a lot of people, but if it's done for good reason, then things work out. Metaphor's manga has a lot of potential, but I hope that they've thought out how they're going to handle all the changes within the first chapter, and how that influences the narrative down the line. In short, adaptations don't necessarily have to be one-to-one, as changing the form in which something is presented might mean you need to keep the audience engaged in different ways. Either way, whether there was purpose behind these changes or it ultimately falls flat, is gonna have to be a wait-and-see game.
You call this real?
And that's where we're left for the first chapter of Metaphor Refantazio's manga. This is going to be running on a monthly schedule, so it'll probably be some time before we see the next events unfold. Either way, I hope it turns out well, because having multiple ways to engage with the story is pretty cool, and hopefully it doesn't wind up like Persona 5 the animation, which is just a inferior version of Persona 5. In short, for that one, just play the game. And you can let me know what you think of Metaphor's manga adaptation in the comments down below. As always, you can leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe to the channel for more things Atlas, Metaphor, and JRPG related. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.